His Holiness is asking how many of those from Tibet raise their hands. Those who can attend the Kala Chakra initiation, raise your hands. Those who cannot attend Kala Chakra initiation, you don't need to feel so sad, because on the 13, 14, and 15 dates of the Tibetan 11th month, I'm going to do the preliminary process of the initiation, as well as the 2 days of actual Kala Chakra initiation on these 3 days. And then you can make your prayers from Tibet, and since your faith is unshakable, I will also, for our fellow Tibetans inside Tibet, I will also visualize you amongst the audience for receiving this Kala Chakra initiation. Similarly, there are many Chinese Buddhists inside China for whom, amongst whom there would be many who wish to receive the initiation. So I will have them in my visualization. So the blessings of the masters and the meditational deities regarding their blood. There's no difference. It doesn't make difference in with distance. The distance does not make distance to receive the blessings. Even during the time of the Buddha, there were cases when the disciples, some disciples were ordained as monastics through letters, and therefore, since this happened during the time of the Buddha himself, although we may be geographically distant, but if you keep your faith, and I also visualize you and include you within the audience, you would receive the initiation. Therefore, you don't need to feel too sad. Of course, you came over in order to receive the initiation, but because of some political reason, you have to go return to Tibet. On the one hand, it's a sad thing, so that we, the Tibetans in the diaspora and in exile, and those inside Tibet, have been separated for over 57 years. And during this period of time, our generations have changed. There's been few generations, and nevertheless, regarding the teaching of the Buddha, you still have a firm teaching of the Buddha, but there are also those who have no faith in religion, but they're feeling as Tibetans. The spirit of Tibetanness is very strong. Therefore, the undaunted Tibetan spirit inside Tibet has been really strong, unwavering, and it is becoming more and more clear by the years. So I'd like to thank all our fellow Tibetans inside Tibet, and you should still work hard. So since some of you are going to return soon, I would like to tell you that it's very important to educate our younger generation in Tibetan mainly, and also Chinese. It's important to learn them so that you could have modern education in the modern subjects, as well as our cultural heritage, that 5 major and 5 minor sciences. Within the 5 major, there is medicine, and then language, and epistemology. So language includes Tibetan. So regarding the epistemology, it's only in the Tibetan tradition that we have the study of Buddhist epistemology, and not other Buddhist countries. And it's also the case that those who use logic and epistemology to study philosophy in depth exist only among Tibetans. Of course, in Chinese translation, there is the Mula Madhyamaka Karika in Chinese, as well as Madhyamaka Avatara and its auto-commentary in Chinese, but it's very difficult to find rigorous study of them. So in the Chinese tradition, Sandinimochana Sutra is considered as a definitive teaching of the Buddha, whereas Master Nagarjuna and his followers consider it as a provisional teaching. And so the study of Buddhism through logic, and the study of philosophy, in-depth study of philosophy, exists only in the Tibetan tradition. And then regarding Tibetan medicine, it is something that proves very beneficial in today's modern world. And then regarding arts and crafts, we could also include within this science and technology, so that we could, with these, all the major subjects or disciplines that are studied in our modern schools are encompassed within these 5 major subjects. So that we could have the modern skills in technology and science, and called as a support to this, then we could also have science. So we should focus on learning the modern subjects. Since Deng Xiaoping's time, there's been policy of liberalization in economy. Economic liberalization, you also have the opportunity to make wealth and money, but whatever wealth you may make, you must not use it for some selfish interest, like buying huge expensive cars or using them for alcoholism and smoking, and also buying very expensive jewelries, and also animal fur and so forth. But you should use the money that you make for the education of the general public. For example, you can set up you can use your money for production of cheese and butter, that are actually canned butter and cheese. Some in the mat areas, some people seem to do that. So these are things that we could do in practical terms, and if we could do them, it's always good. And so today we are gathered here for the teaching requested by the people from the Russian Federation, And then there are people who have been, who are traditionally Buddhists, such as Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva. And so we have very strong ties in terms of Buddhism with these republics of the Russian Federation. When I was a child, we had many Mongolian scholars. Some of them were from Buryatia, some from Kalmykia, and some of them were from Tuva. Even in my time, at that time, there were a few of them in Tibet, but slowly there wasn't any inflow of the Mongolian students from these regions. But today we have students from Kalmykia, Buryatia, and Tuva, some of them, and then also many from the Outer Mongolia, Mongolian Republic, and also some even from the Inner Mongolia. So we have around maybe 400 or 500 students, Mongolian, ethnically Mongolian students, in our monastic institutions in South India. And then today, from amongst the Caucasians, Russians, we have people taking interest, as well as from other European countries, US, Canada, Australia, and so forth. There are people taking interest in Buddhism. So therefore, from amongst the Caucasian Russians, there are people taking interest in the teaching of the Buddha, but some, though they may not have an interest in Buddhism as a religion as such, but they still take interest in the science, philosophy, philosophical concepts that are found in Buddhist literature. Recently, I was in Outer Mongolia. There was we had a discussion on Buddhism and modern science, which went very well. And then here in India, it's been over 30 years since I have been having discussions and dialogues with modern scientists within Buddhism, Buddhist science, and so forth, and modern science. And then I had, there was a symposium on science and Buddhism in Drepung in South India. And two Russians have also come there in Mundgot, Drepung. So we could also have Russian in the future. I had a discussion of having Russian scientists taking part in participating in this kind of meeting. So Buddhism in general, and particularly the Nalanda tradition, explains the nature of the basis in terms of philosophical idea, the nature of the basis, and then in relation to that, how we could make transformation within our mind. And so with this comes in the teaching of the path system, and this mind which is luminous, naturally luminous. When we make transformation fully of it, so that we can realize the full potential of this clear-eyed mind fully, then we come across the explanation of the ultimate realization of the path and the purification of the negativities. And so, therefore, someone who has reached that ultimate state of abandonment and realization is called a Buddha, which has the connotation of dispelling all, eliminating all stains or defilements from within mind stream, and having the full knowledge of everything. So that is the final stage of attainment, which is Buddhahood. And so in order to reach that goal, we need to base ourselves on the reality of things on the basis level. The Buddha, otherwise it cannot happen merely through blessing. The Buddha himself has said that the sages do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they remove the suffering, the cause of suffering, nor do they remove the, could they remove this suffering of sentient beings? Nor can they transpose their realization into others. But having gone through the countless eons of accumulation of merit and wisdom, how do the Buddhas help sentient beings? Is by giving us teaching on as to how we should go about with the transformation of our minds. And therefore the Buddha teaches from his own experience how to go about with the practice to reach that goal. And therefore we come across the teaching of the basis, the path, and the resultant stage. So the people who are gathered here have interest in the Buddha's teaching, and you have really painstakingly come here, spending lots of money and with great difficulty. Therefore, of course, when there are people who, even though they wish to attend my teachings, they do not have the financial resources to attend those teachings in India, and therefore we have been having teachings in Latvia also, as well. And so some of you from the Russian Federation have attended this teaching here, and I'd like to welcome you and greet you all. So since about 2 years or so, I taught a guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. We have finished until the end of the 8th chapter, and now we are on the 9th chapter of this text. Those of you who have attended the teachings before, also the previous teachings here, those who have not attended the first, those who have attended the teachings, then those who have not attended the previous teachings, raise your hands. So regarding the teaching of the Buddha, in general, we talk about going through the process of listening, reflecting, and meditating. So you can, in the case of studying, you can read books and then also listen to the teachings from others, so that you have some understanding of the teaching based on this listening to the teaching. And then you go through the process of reflecting on the teaching and developing this understanding based on reflection. So the understanding that you gain through reading or listening to the teaching may not be very stable, because you could read other books and find some other explanation, and then your previous understanding may change. And as well as it is with regard to some teachings that you receive, some other person may say something different from what you have already heard, and therefore your understanding may change. But the texts that were written in India in those ancient times, what you need to do is, those masters of the past have actually compared different positions, different assertions, philosophical assertions, and so forth. So with regards to certain masters like Dharmakirti, he mentions many different Indian non-Buddhist philosophical positions, as well as in the Bhaviveka's writings, we find many different philosophical systems and their assertions given in his blades of reasoning. And so they have really used this human intelligence to delve into these philosophical systems, just as the Buddha himself has said not to follow him out of faith and devotion alone, but told his followers, like monks and scholars, to use their mind in order to analyze his teachings, investigate into his teaching, like a goldsmith testing gold, the quality of gold, by burning, cutting and polishing, rubbing. So whether to enhance the gold quality of the gold or to differentiate what the quality of the gold. And so just as a goldsmith tests, the Buddha says, "O monks and nuns, just as a goldsmith tests the quality of gold by burning, cutting and rubbing, likewise you should examine my teaching and then follow it, not because you have devotion to me." And therefore, by doing this kind of comparison and contrasting the teachings, then you could actually develop a conviction in the teaching, which is quite a high standard of conviction or confidence that you gain. And even if you may have found some conviction in the teaching, you should not remain there, but you should apply the teaching within yourself and develop the experience. And therefore, within the experience, there are experiences which you may be able to develop when you actually put some effort, and then that further develops into an experience which arises spontaneously, so that in this way you can overcome. In this way there will be a time when you are able to overcome the negative emotions to a certain degree, and then to overcome the negative emotions and the defilements in the mind completely. And therefore, here again, the basis, path, and result is related. And therefore, because of this, I have been having this dialogue with the scientists in the beginning, myself alone, but now, and then gradually, even the monastics in the monastic learning centers, like Sarah Garden Drepong, also have the monks studying science. And today, they have actually science centers in these monasteries, and also the different equipments are set up in these places for the monastics to study and experiment what science teaches. And therefore, we had during the symposium, the recent symposium, the monks were able to explain the Buddhist philosophical ideas and the emotions, mind, and so forth quite well in English. Their English, using English as the medium of communication. So I found it quite impressive that the monks were able to do this. Because English, on the one hand, of course, English is known as a universal language. So I usually tell the Japanese friends, Dharma friends, to learn English, without which you may remain rather closed-minded. And if you learn English, you could communicate with others and you could have better open up yourself. And so English being a universal language, I also told in the south of India, in Mundgot, that this was the last symposium was a new experience with scientists, having discussions and dialogue with these geishis and scholars of the Tibetan, from the Tibetan monastic institutions, and could communicate with the scientists in English. So we should actually see the framework of the Buddhism from within these philosophical assertions, the philosophical teachings. And therefore, in the Indian classical text, there is mention of what are known as the 4 points. First one is the subject matter, what the subject matter of the text is, and by understanding that subject matter, what is the temporary goal and what is the ultimate goal. These must be understood. So that you find interest, your interest to study the text would be piqued, and without knowing what the text subject matter and the goal are, and then you'll see the connection, the link between the subject, the temporary goal, and the ultimate goal, that that there is a causal link. So otherwise, if you follow the teaching of the Buddha only on the basis of faith, then you will not go through this kind of analysis. So I tell that we should follow the trend or the pattern of those with sharp faculty, which means that people, those who do examine the teaching in this way. So of the 7 billion people on this earth, so there are many different digits that we could go through in terms of counting the numbers. In Tibetan we have Saya, then Saya means the million, then the 10 million, and then so forth. And when we talk in English, there are numbers like trillion and zillion and so forth. But today we are 7 billion people on this earth. So as people, we are one community. So this one community of humans, if the entire 7 billion people have happiness, then as individuals we would also be happy. Otherwise, if we are full of suspicion, bullying others and killing one another, if we continue to live like this in human society, if somebody has no thought, no mind, cannot think anything, then that's a different case. But if we are thinking people, we cannot live like that. It's a sad thing to live like that. So as Buddhists, we pray for the happiness of all mother sentient beings who are as infinite as the space. If we mean of our prayers, we should do something in action. So while you may say your prayer for the happiness, may all sentient beings have happiness in its causes, while you are seated on your cushion in meditation. But once you are out of the meditation, if you really do something else, then that's really wrong. So we have some karmic connection with these what is known as the 3 great trichilocosm. But we cannot do much to other beings in other galaxies and so forth. But if we are to be practical about the prayer that we say, may all sentient beings have happiness, then we are directly connected to the 7 billion people on this earth. Although there are other animals on the land and sea and so forth, insects, down to the insects, we cannot do much for them. But if we are able to create a peaceful world and create happiness amongst human community, it is something that we can do. And therefore, we must do something, act on there. And some people and scientists have said that a child, an infant, maybe a few months, like 5 or 6 months old, pre-verbal, is not able to, a child who is not yet able to, has no language developed yet, but has the sensory perceptions active. And so when this child was shown some cartoon, two different cartoons, where in one cartoon, one child is trying to push up a ball uphill, and then another child is actually helping each other, and then the children are also happy with each other, laughing and smiling with each other. And so when this cartoon was shown to this small infant, 5 or 6 months old infant, pre-verbal infant, this child laughs. There's this positive reaction. Whereas in another cartoon, when which shows one child pushing a ball uphill and having difficulty pushing it up, and while this child is having difficulty, another child comes from the front and pushes him down, pushes the ball down, so that it's causing obstacle. And so when this was seen by the infant, 5, 6 months old, there is this negative reaction. And so from this, the scientists kind of conclude that the basic human nature is compassion. Because when the children help each other in solving the problem, then that actually makes the infant laugh and be happy. Whereas when a child disturbs someone having difficulty and obstructs someone, then that is not appreciated by the infant. And then if you are full of negative emotions like jealousy, anger, hatred, and so forth, without compassion, where there's no compassion at all, then that in turn hampers your physical health as well. And there is, within our body, there is the immune system, and this kind of emotion, experience of hatred, anger, constant anger and hatred and so forth, actually eats away the immune system, depletes the immune system. And therefore, compassion, on the contrary, increases the immune system. And therefore, this is what we hear from the scientists, from their experiments. And then in our text, there is a mention of the Buddha nature, the potential for us to become, to be able to become a Buddha. And so, the scientific findings like this, where they say that the basic human nature is compassion, seems to support our thesis of that we have Buddha nature. So as sentient beings, as those having experience and feelings, we need to do our best to promote love and compassion, not from a religious point of view, but as part of an academic subject, academic discipline. The existing modern education system is inadequate in doing this so far. Has been inadequate in promoting this. because it's mainly focused on the material development, and so it's lacking in its endeavor to promote love and compassion, these basic human good qualities of human beings. So people who are able to do some, give some help to others or cause trouble to others have modern education, but they try to find happiness from outside. The modern education system itself is oriented towards that kind of a pattern of finding the happiness from outside. So without having to talk about past or future lives, hell and heaven and so forth, we are here only talking about having a good, happy life and healthy life. And so this teaching and introducing the basic human values, positive values like compassion, should be included or introduced in modern secular education system. In America and other places, there are people who have been working on this kind of creating a curriculum for the teaching the secular ethics or universal ethics, and we may be able to come out with the curriculum of maybe a draft curriculum in the next year. Without having to talk about religion, if we could introduce the importance of love and compassion to others, it would be very helpful, because everyone appreciates good health, happy, joyous life. So whether you are wealthy or not, religious believers or not, non-believers, doesn't matter. We have, as human beings, and those having been those who were born from our mothers, we have biologically, we are equipped with this kind of basic human nature. And so if you can actually see this in children in the beginning of our life, but as we grow up and we go through the school system and receive all kinds of instructions and information and so forth, then this basic human quality becomes dormant, and therefore the people cause problems and to create troubles to others, like killing and so forth. And so as human beings, it is our responsibility of each and every one of us to make our effort to promote this basic human value. And secondly, as a Buddhist monk myself, I find it very important to have harmony amongst all religious traditions. Today, because of difference in religion, people try to divide and make division amongst human beings, and in the worst case scenario, people even kill others in the name of religion. For while, at this very moment, while we are peacefully staying peaceful in this hall, but if we reflect on places like Somalia and so forth in Africa, and also in the Middle East, the Arab regions, there are people killing each other, one another. So this is something that is a creation or doing of human beings. It's not some, these are not natural disasters. Those people involved in this kind of killing were not like this, killers right from the beginning when they were born and they were children. But because this basic human quality of love, compassion became dormant, and the secondary importance of the secondary level of importance of being of different races, different religion and so forth became more important for them. Therefore, we cause troubles to others. I mean, they cause trouble to others in the name of religion. So all religions teach love, compassion, patience, or tolerance, forgiveness, self-discipline, and contentment. So all religions are same in this, teaching these values. So with regard to the religious aspect, all religions are same. But regarding the philosophical aspect, there are differences. But despite the difference in philosophical ideas, the purpose of these philosophies is to enhance our love and compassion. So we have the same goal. If you really think closely about our religious traditions, this is the fact. Religion is not about the different costumes that we wear, but the main essential practice or message is love and compassion. Whether they are Islam, I mean, the Muslims, Christians, or Jews, they who believe in a creator goal, creator God, their understanding is that this God has created us, and the God is seen as infinite love, and therefore when they think about themselves and others being creations of such a God, they would feel closer to God, and they would also have this feeling to, I mean, to put into practice to practice love and compassion. So the message is, the goal is same, but the philosophies are different. And we need these different philosophical ideas because of the mental dispositions, interest, inclinations, and the nature or characters of different beings. Even within the teaching of the Buddha, because of the different mental dispositions amongst his own disciples, the followers, the Buddha taught different philosophical systems like Vaibhashikas, Sudhantikas, Chittamatras, and Madhyamakas. And within the Vaibhashikas, there were 18 different subsects. And we cannot say that some of those subsects were Buddhists and not others, and so forth. Of course, amongst the Vaibhashikas, I mean, there is the Vatsiputras, who have some idea of a self. So from the point of view of, for example, the Madhyamakas and the Chittamatras and the schools below it, I mean, were either, I mean, they fall in the extreme of nihilism or eternalism, according to their assertions. But all these religious traditions all these philosophical schools were the follower of the same teacher, the Buddha. And so similarly, although the different religious traditions have different philosophies, their message is, the practice is the same, love and compassion. And therefore, we have the basis for a harmonious living amongst the religious traditions. And then, with regard to the different philosophical systems that spread in India, we first have the Sankhya school, and from which they derive the different non-Buddhist traditions. And then, I mean, of course, in India, there were those religions that were, I mean, homegrown. And then there are other religious traditions in India which actually emigrated from other parts of the world, like the Parsis or the Zoroastrianism and so forth. Of course, there are amongst the followers of these different religions, homegrown as well as the immigrated religions. Sometimes there are problems happen, but on the whole, all these religious traditions in that are well settled in India have lived in harmony through respect to one another. So if this harmony amongst the different religious traditions could happen in this great land of India, in this great nation, then it is possible for the other parts of the world to have such a harmony amongst religions. And therefore, this is what I try to do, to bring harmony amongst all religious traditions, and I put effort in this. Whenever I have the opportunity, and whenever you have the opportunity, please do work for religious harmony to the best of your ability. And then in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have the Nyingma, the old translation school, and then within this new translation schools, we have the Kadam, then Sakya, Gerju, and then Geluk traditions. And also we have the Burn tradition. In the past, during the Tibetan times of the Tibetan emperors, ancient king emperors, there were conflicts between the Buddhists and the Burn followers. But today, if we look at the Burn monasteries, the bigger Burn monasteries have the study of classic texts that are the Buddhist texts, classic texts. So I was in those monasteries before, and so we can see that they are also studying these Indian classic texts. So it's important for us as Tibetans following the different religious traditions, Buddhist and Burn and so forth, to live in harmony, to have harmony amongst ourselves. In the past, there were lots of conflict in the name of religion, even within Tibetan communities. And then, as a Tibetan, majority of the Tibetans put their trust and hope in me, and I have the responsibility for the teaching of the Buddha. Whereas, in terms of the political responsibility, from since 2001, we started to have the elected leader, political leader, and since 2011, since 2001, we had this elected political leader, and the political matters were taken care by them. And then, since 2011, I completely retired from all political responsibilities. And since the fifth Dalai Lama's time, the dual responsibility that the Dalai Lamas have been carrying on completely stopped voluntarily, with proudly and happily, so that in the future the Dalai Lama institution, of course it's a different matter whether it should continue or not, but in case it continues, the Dalai Lama institution will not take the political responsibility, since I voluntarily seized it, the political responsibility. So as a Tibetan, having responsibility on the Tibet, and my responsibility also is to work and to urge others to work for the environmental protection of Tibet, and then second, to protect the Tibetan culture and religion, which is very profound, As I said earlier, this kind of tradition that we have in the Tibetan tradition does not exist anywhere. So religion, which is connected with the Buddhism, is, I say, a treasure of the entire world, a common treasure of the world. And we can, with our language, we can explain these rich, profound and vast philosophical systems and the wisdom thoroughly, precisely. It's not possible to do so in other languages like Hindi and so forth. And it seems that the profound philosophical texts and epistemological texts written by, for example, Dignaga, and Dignaga's Compendium of Valid Cognition doesn't seem to have been translated into Chinese in the past, and also what are known as the 7 treatises of Dharmakirti were not translated into Chinese as well. And then whereas in our language we have all these classic texts on epistemology, and therefore to explain Buddhist philosophy through logic and using epistemology, logic and reasoning, the language that is best is Tibetan today. So, of course, maybe in the 7th century some effort was made to translate Buddhist texts into Tibetan, but since the 8th century the effort was increased to translate classic Indian philosophical texts especially, and therefore as translations were carried out over time, Tibetan language also developed. And therefore, Tibetan has become a language which can actually go parallel to Sanskrit and to explain the Buddhist, the philosophical systems of ancient India. So this Nalanda tradition, which is logical and reasoning and also scientific, and could be explained through our own language, Tibetan. Therefore, this language becomes very precious. And therefore, we need to preserve this tradition of the profound philosophical systems and the language in which these are disseminated, that is Tibetan. And so we need to work hard towards this goal. So regarding the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, is amongst the Tengyur collection of literature. There are translations of the Tengyur translations of the exegetical texts. I received the explanatory transmission of this text from Khuno Lama Tenzin Gyatsen, who was a scholar of the 5 different sciences, but a very humble practitioner. And I received it from him, and he also personally instructed me to teach it as many times as possible. And so accordingly, so on my part, after receiving teaching on this from Khuno Lama Rinpoche, I've been reading it, reflecting on it. So I found that I found it very beneficial to develop this bodhicitta, on the basis of equaling and exchanging self and others, on the basis of this very text. So, with regard to the training of mind for bodhicitta, Khuno Lama Rinpoche also said, he used to say that the Shantideva came around the 8th century, and since he wrote this text, there has not been a greater text for the training of mind and bodhicitta than this very text. And therefore, I teach this text, and on many occasions when I have the opportunity to give teachings. So this has 10 chapters. Bodhisattva Charyavatara has 10 chapters. First is the benefit of the bodhicitta, the awakening mind, and then the second and third chapters talk about the 7-limb practice, and then also embracing bodhicitta. And then the conscientious, the guarding alertness and conscientiousness chapters, and patience, and then enthusiasm. So the 6th chapter, patience, is very important chapter, because what disturbs our minds mainly is anger, and therefore the antidote to anger is very powerfully given in this 6th chapter on patience. And then the 8th chapter on meditation gives the faults of self-cherishing attitude and the benefits of cherishing others. And so if we could actually combine these two chapters, chapter 6 and 8, it is very powerful to develop bodhicitta. Then we have the 9th chapter, wisdom. So regarding this chapter, it establishes the Madhyamaka view, the philosophical view, and Shantideva's philosophical view is so follows, I mean, it's exactly the same as those of the philosophical views of the Madhyamaka masters like Buddhapalita and Chandrakirti. And within the Madhyamaka, the middle way school, there are those schools which reject any objective existence and things, and therefore they explain the reality of the things precisely as it is. And so this text, this chapter also does that. And then regarding the Madhyamaka study of Madhyamaka texts, I mean, in order to understand what is taught here well, we need to study Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Madhyamaka Avatara, and the 400 verses. And in order to understand the Mula Madhyamaka Karika well, we need to, it's very important to study the Prasanna Pada by Chandrakirti. And in order to understand certain philosophical arguments from Bhava Viveka, we also need to read his writings, like Blades of Reasoning and so when commenting on the rejection of birth or production from the 4 alternatives in the Buddhapalita commentary, Bhava Viveka criticizes the Buddhapalita, and then to this criticism the Chandrakirti does lots of critical analysis in both the texts, and he actually gives how things are posited by way of name, and how things are conventionally established. And so Chandrakirti's Prasanapada, the clear words commentary, is very important to understand. And you can actually see the significance of this text if you read Bhaviveka's lamp of wisdom and the blaze of reasoning. So if you could actually read them together, it would really give you a good understanding of the Chandrakirti's own position well. So this is an introductory remark that I have made. We don't have anyone who could say the Pali Sutras, recite Pali Sutras. Is there anyone?
Sanskrit Zashiro.
First, we'll have the recitation of the Heart Sutra, I think, in Sanskrit.
Original text. Panchaparamita Shindaya. It's the original Sanskrit.
Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Volja Peak Mountain, together with the great gathering of the Sangha of monks and the great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One entered the Samadhi that perceives all phenomena called profound illumination, and at the same time, Noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the marked great being, while practicing profound perfection of wisdom, so in this way he saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, Venerable said to the Noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, how should a son of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom, addressed in this way, Noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, said to the Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, O son and daughter of noble family, a son of daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should see in this way, see the steps, even the five skandhas also to be empty of nature. The form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form too is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feelings, perception, formation, and consciousness are empty. Thus, Shariputra, all the dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics, there is no birth, no cessation, there is no impurity, no purity, there is no decrease or no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no mental phenomenon, no eye, dhatu, up to no mind dhatu, to dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness, dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance, up to no old age and no end of old age, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Panchaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of the mind, there is no fear. They transcend misconceptions completely and have passed definitively beyond all suffering. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Panchaparamita fully awakened to the unsurpassable true complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Panchaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that counts all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Panchaparamita mantra is said in this way: Tatyata Gatagata Paragata Parasangata Bodhi Swaha. In Tibetan, I'll just say this verse in praise of the mother of all Buddhas, the perfection of wisdom.
This is the
verse of salutation from Abhisamaya Alamkara by Maitreya. Yungdeva Chate Lo. Verse of salutation from Lamadema Kakarika by Master Nagarjuna.
Yeah.
Now next in Russian, the Heart Sutra.
На санскрите Бхагавати Пряжнам Пирамида Хридая, на тибетском Чамдандема Шрабки Парол по Чимбе Никбо, Пряжна Парамиты ни речью, ни мыслью невыразимой, нерожденной, непрекращаемой таковости пространства, объекту практики, различающейся познающей мудрости, Матари Джай трех времен, поклоняюсь. Такой речи я слышал. Однажды Бхагаван пребывал в Раджнагрихе на горе Григахута вместе с великой общиной монахов и великой общиной бодхисаттв. В то время Бхагаван погрузился в самадхи перечня дхарм, именуемое глубинное сияние. И в то же время Бодхисаттва Махасаттва Ария Авалокитешвара, исследуя практику глубинной пряжной парамиты, узрел и 5 сан самосущно пустыми. Такой силой Будда, достопочтенный Шарипутра, обратился к Бодхисаттве Махасаттве Ари Авалокитешвара с таким вопросом: как должно получать тех благородных сыновей или благородных дочерей, которые желают практиковать практику глубинной пряжной парамиты? Так он вопрошал. И Бодхисаттва Махасаттва Ари Авалокитешвара ответил достопочтенному сыну Шарадвати такими словами: Шарипутра, такие благородные сыновья или благородные дочери, которые желают практиковать практику глубинной пряжной парамиты, должны исследовать также и эти 5 ханс, следовательно, видеть их самосущно пустыми. Форма, пустотность форма. Пустотность не отлична от формы, а форма не отлична от пустотности. Также пусты и чувства, и понятия, и созидатель, и сознание. Шарипутра, таким образом, все дхармы пусты, не имеют характеристик, не рождены, не прекращаются, не загрязнены, не очищены, не ущербны и не полны. Шарипутра. Поэтому пустотности нет формы, нет чувства, нет понятия, нет созидателя, нет сознания, нет глаза, нет уха, нет носа, нет языка, нет тела, нет ума, нет видимой формы, нет звука, нет запаха, нет вкуса, нет осязаемого, нет харм, нет начиная с элемента глаза до элемента ума. И нет также до элемента сознания ума, нет неведения, нет исчезновения неведения. И далее до того, что нет также старости смерти, и нет исчезновения старости и смерти. Также нет страдания, источника страдания, пресечения, пути, нет мудрости, нет обретения и нет необретения. Поэтому, Шарипутра, так как нету бодхисаттв достижения, они опираются и пребывают в этой глубинной пряжной парамите, без загрязнения и страха в душе, полностью уйдя от превратности, достигая края входа от скорби. И все Будды, пребывающие в 3 времена, истинно, совершенно пробуждались в несравненном, подлинно совершенном Бодхи, опираясь на пряжную парамиту. И поэтому мантра пряжной пирамиды, мантра великого ведения, наивысшая мантра, непревзойденная мантра, мантра, полностью умиротворяющая страдания. Не ложно, знаешь же, что истина. Мантра пряжной пирамиды произносится Даята, Ом, Гате, Гате, Парагате, Парасамгате, Боте, Сохо. Баджарипутра. Вот таким образом Бодхисаттва Махасаттва изучают глубинную пряжную пирамиду. Затем Бхагаван, выйдя из того самадхи, выразил одобрение Бодхисаттве Махасаттве Ари Авалокитешваре, сказав: прекрасно, прекрасно, благородный сын, это именно так. Как тобою показано, так и практикуют глубинную пряжную парамиту. И Тхадагата возрадуется. Когда изрек Бхагаван такую речь, то достопочтенная Шарипутра, Бодхисаттва Махасаттва Ари Авалокитешвара, то исполненная всех достоинств а даже боги, люди, асуры, кангарвы, все вместе возликовали и воздали хвалу проповеди Бхагавана. Закончена Махаянская сутра, называемая «Святое сердце Бхагавати Пряжна Парамиты».
투지체.
Thank you.
하라쇼.
So, what we just recited, the heart of the perfection wisdom, is texts belonging to the perfection of wisdom teaching, and it is known as the perfection of wisdom 25 verses. And within the perfection of wisdom teachings, we have the perfection of wisdom of the in 100,000 verses, and perfection of wisdom in 25,000 verses, and perfection of wisdom in 8,000 verses, which are called the lengthy, the medium, and the short. And then there are those of the perfection wisdom teachings, which are such as the Vajracchedaka, the Dhammapada Sutra. So, of course, the Buddha didn't teach these, give these teachings on the perfection of wisdom right away, right after his enlightenment. And he even said that I found this nectar-like truth, or Dharma, which is profound, free from elaborations, clear light, and uncompounded, which even if I were to teach to others, nobody will understand it. And therefore I will remain in the forest in silence. And so this perfection of wisdom is said to be something which has these qualities, profound qualities of profundity, clear light, and uncompounded, and so forth. So he said that he has realized it fully and awakened to it completely, therefore it will not be understood, even if he were to teach to others. Nobody will be able to hear it, even. Whereas in the teachings like you are your own master and so forth are very similar to the teachings of the Buddha. And then in the case of practice of non-violence and so forth, it's similar also with Jainism and so forth. And so, as I said earlier, amongst all the religious traditions which are in the world, Buddhism is the only religion which asserts no self-theory. And therefore the Buddha said, even if I were to teach others, it will not be understood by anyone. And so in the Madhyamaka Karika also mentions that the Buddha's mind turned away from giving teaching because of this understanding of the profound, that the others will not be able to take this teaching. And then as his people began to find some interest in the teaching of selflessness with regard to in connection with the 5 first disciples and so forth, then the Buddha gave teaching on the 4 Noble Truths and its 16 characteristics. So these form the basis, the foundational teaching of the Buddha. And then when you come to practice these teachings, we have the 37 wings of enlightenment, or harmonies to enlightenment. And therefore, it is found in the Pali Sutras, the Pali tradition. So what is found in the Theravada, the Pali tradition that is spread in Sri Lanka, Dharma, Thailand, and so forth, I mean, these are the fundamental teachings of the Buddha that we share. So the basic, I mean, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths talks about the suffering, its origin, cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation. I mean, should form as give us this big framework within which we should be able to work out the teaching of the Buddha. So on the basis of understanding the basic nature of the things as nature of suffering and so forth, the Buddha, when it comes to actually engaging in what should be adopted and what should be discarded, the Buddha said the suffering must be known and understood, and the origin of suffering must be overcome, and the path, the cessation must be made manifest or experienced, and the path must be cultivated. As a result of doing this, as a result of putting into practice the teaching pertaining to this functionality of the Four Noble Truths, then what you attain is that the Buddha says, once the suffering is overcome, known, and you overcome the suffering, there's nothing to be known, and then the origin of suffering, regarding that, there's nothing to be overcome once you have overcome it, and then once you have actualized the cessation, there's nothing to be actualized, and regarding the path, there's nothing to be cultivated once you have gone to the end of the path. So, within the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, there is the teaching pertaining to the nature of things, the basis, and then the teaching pertaining to the functions of these Four Noble Truths, and then the result which you attain on the basis of this. So in order to make progression along the path, we need to meditate on the characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, such as the characteristics of impermanence, the characteristics of suffering, and then characteristics of the selflessness. And with regard to selflessness, there are the gross selflessness, such as the lack of permanent, autonomous, or single independent self. And so these teachings on impermanence, suffering, and selflessness, the gross selflessness, are in order to train our mind to mature it further, so that you become apt at receiving the teaching on the final nature of things. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna, in his Bodhicitta Vivarana, mentions this and says that the supreme means of transforming our mind is, or purification is, the understanding of or the development of the wisdom of suchness. So if we look at our own life, it's impermanent. Our mind and our body is changing, and we age. So regarding the aging, this body, aged body cannot just happen immediately. You can't be a young person and immediately the next moment an old aged person as such. But the aging takes it goes through a process of change. So change like this does not happen all of a sudden. So a change in the year happens every month, and within a month you have the days, the weeks, and the weeks, changes in the weeks to go through every day, and then a day in 24 hours, and each hour has its minutes and seconds and so forth. And therefore, with regard to the impermanence, on the basis of understanding the gross or the coarser level of impermanence, we need to enter into this subtle understanding of emptiness. And so, regarding Vaibhashikas, they talk about arising, the four stages: arising, abiding, decaying, and then disintegration. Whereas the Sautrantikas say that the minute something comes into being, it actually disintegrates, and therefore arisal and disintegration happen at the same time, because the very cause which has brought about the result actually subjects it to disintegration. So this is very significant, very important thing to understand. So when we take the suffering nature of the aggregates, the fact that it disintegrates, for example, this aggregate, the fact that it disintegrates is because of the cause which has brought about it. And therefore, it is under the power of that cause. And when we look at the cause itself, that comprise those of the origin of suffering. And within that origin of suffering, we have the karma and the afflictive, the disturbing emotions, and how these disturbing emotions and the karma are come into work is explained on the basis of the 12 links of dependent origination. And therefore, the psychophysical aggregates that we have within this unenlightened existence is seen as because of ignorance. And therefore, when we see that ignorance, actually, we are under the sway of ignorance, then we will find that this kind of cause is something untrustworthy. So the fact that things disintegrate moment by moment shows that it's under the power of its cause. And when the cause is found to be the karma and these disturbing emotions, we from understanding impermanence, we see the suffering nature of our aggregates. And therefore, there is nothing to be clung on to or be possessive of. And because it is under the sway of this kind of cause, there is this understanding of a self, there being no self, which is permanent, single, and autonomous. And when you actually delve into the cause itself, you find the origin of suffering, and which has its four characteristics, which are the cause, that it's a cause, that it's an intense cause, and that it produces intensely, and that it's a condition. And then with regards to these characteristics, it would be good to give a good understanding if we relate them to the three conditions given by a Sangha, which are the unwavering cause, which means that there's no will of a God which precedes in existence coming to being. So this actually rejects the idea that things arise without cause. And because when you have an effect, that effect undergoes change. it shows that the cause which has given rise to it also must undergo change, and therefore the cause must also be impermanent. And it's not just enough to have an impermanent, cause being impermanent, but the cause must be compatible to the result, because we have the experience as a result of the experiences of pleasure and pain, and therefore a painful experience cannot come from a positive cause, and the positive cause cannot come from some negative experience, cannot come from negative cause. And therefore whatever the kind of effect it is, it has to have its a cause which is compatible to give rise to it, and therefore that intense production. And then we have the third condition, the fourth condition of the characteristic of the origin of suffering is condition, and this could be those of the within the to relate to the 12 links, grasping and craving. So the fact that something disintegrates and the functioning thing disintegrates is nature. Once it comes into existence, you cannot make it permanent, or you cannot stop it from disintegrating. And so that disintegration of functioning things is its nature. So when you do this kind of analysis through argumenting on principle of argument, what you have is of the four different principles. There are those of the principle of relativity, and the principle of dependence, and then the principle of functionality of things. And so within this function, the relativity or dependence principle, we have the causal dependence. So the function of these two things, such as the basic source elements, like the fire, water, wind, and earth, we have them also as objects, and then there are the perceptions, which are the subjective experience of those objects, and so these we can say are nature. The fact that there is water, an element, this earth, and so on, is nature. And then the perception and having this characteristic of being awareness, being aware and clarity is also its nature. So on the basis of understanding the nature of things, the principle of nature of things, we can explain the principle of functionality and also the principle of relativity or dependence, and on the basis of these two, then we can actually build up arguments. So there is the principle of argument. So all of us, when we look at the cause, of course, all of us do not want suffering, but we want happiness. But because of our mind being unruly or disciplined, we actually bring about suffering or happiness for ourselves, pain and pleasure to ourselves. Nobody wants to have suffering, but we cause ourselves suffering. Of course, there are many people in the world today who deliberately cause suffering to themselves on purpose. But nobody really voluntarily wants happiness. I mean, they want suffering, but we cause suffering. And why this is so? We can explain it on the basis of the reason that it's because of ignorance. So as long as there is a distorted outlook or distorted perception of reality, there is always an opposing factor which can eliminate it. Because that opposing factor can see the reality as it is, and therefore as counters this distorted perception. So mind is something immaterial, non-physical, and therefore when we talk about how to actually see the counter force to the negative emotions and so forth, we need to see this opposition in terms of how they are opposed, in terms of what they perceive, really looking at one object. So, for example, when we have some scarecrow, I mean, some person might have a perception that there is a person there in the field, but at the closer look, the person will find that, oh, it's just a scarecrow, and therefore that knowledge of the scarecrow can eliminate the misperception that there is a man or a person there, and get rid of the fear. And so there are these states of mind which are counter or which oppose each other, opposite to each other. And therefore, the more you think about the nature of things and develop this, the positive outlook or this outlook or this perception will serve as a counterforce to those distorted way of looking at things, and therefore it has the support of valid knowledge or valid cognition of knowledge, whereas the other one does not have that support. And then the basic nature of mind itself, being clarity and awareness, is something which is a stable feature of the mind, the stable basis. So when we take rebirth, it happens on the basis of this mind. Or when we see beautiful things, for example, when we look at some shows, dance shows, I mean, there is this beautiful music being played. And so during dance performances, there are different physical expressions as well as the beautiful music, and all these beautiful things are there. So the perceptions, seeing the beautiful sight and the beautiful music are there as long as there is the performance going on. And so the perceptions cease when the performance stops, the music stops. And therefore, these perceptions, sensory perceptions of sight and auditory perception, do not have stable, I mean, are not that of the stable basis. And they serve as a medium to the consciousness, to the mind. Although these perceptions themselves, sensory perceptions themselves, are not stable as such, are not stable basis, the mind, the sixth consciousness or the thought is stable, has a stable basis. Because the mind itself remains even when we the perceptions, these sensory perceptions stop, and when we also go into sleep. And then the subtlest state mind is still there when we go through the process of dying and when we reach the clear light of death. And therefore we have cases of people staying in Tukdam or this meditation even after clinical death for about a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. So when we have some kind of a discussion with scientists about this kind of phenomenon of Tukdam, and there are scientists who are doing some investigation into this phenomenon. So they put, when someone is declared clinically dead, and the scientists put some wire and on their head and so forth and checks. So the doctors in the hospital may declare the person dead, which happens according to the medicine when the flow of blood to the brain stops after the heart stops pumping blood. So we call such a phenomenon when a person is not yet, when the subtle mind still is within the body, is still in the process of dying, in the state of dying and not dead. The temporary, adventitious states of mind, the sensory perceptions have stopped, and the brain function also has stopped. But the body remains very fresh. And so the qualities which are developed on the basis of the mind, the sixth mind or the consciousness, is stable. There's a stable basis, and once you develop those certain mental qualities, and these qualities become stable and firm, I mean, you don't need to put extra effort again, again in order to have that experience. Whereas in the case of physical exercises and physical athletic skills, once someone has attained certain proficiency in the skill, and don't do training for a while, they need to go through the exercises in order to build to the same level of proficiency. And so physical qualities like skills, like athletic skills, are not stable as such. And so the qualities built on the basis of the mind, for example, like understanding of selflessness, the stronger it gets, the weaker your grasping at the self becomes. In Mula Madhyamaka Kareka, it says that attachment, hatred, and ignorance arise from some kind of exaggerated way of looking at things. Of course, a pleasant side or thing is there, but when you have this way of looking at things where you actually superimpose a beauty which is not there, then the attachment and so forth arise. And so this is something even scientists say. For example, Aaron Beck, when I met him, he was about 80 something. I had met him, and then 2 years ago I purposely went to meet him, and he's 96 or 97. And he says that when someone becomes angry, the anger sees the person to be totally negative. And he says that negativeness, 90% of it is mental projection, as Master Nagarjuna also says. And so there is this exaggerated way of looking at the things, and this exaggeration also is because of grasping at some independent, absolute existence in things. And therefore it is very clear that this is clear. From my own experience, I can tell that in relation to the four characteristics of the origin of suffering, we can say that the negative emotions on its gross level arises because of some exaggerated way of looking at things, and then this exaggeration also arises, which is the inappropriate mentation, is because of holding on to things and beings to have some objective independent existence. And therefore, when you are able to understand this is the case, you will be able to see that this ignorance, this kind of ignorance, can be overcome completely. And once you overcome a certain degree of negative emotions, it is the state of cessation that you reach. And within the cessation, there are different degrees of the cessation, and then the final state is that of nirvana. And therefore, it has this quality of being cessation and the peace, which is that it is free, your mind is free from the negative emotions. And then it is not just a temporary cessation, but once you have overcome all these negative emotions from within the mind stream, it will not come back. Therefore, it is excellent. And then that is what is known as the freedom from samsara. And then you have, in order to achieve this, we have the path, the true path, which sees the reality of things as it is. Therefore, it's a path, and once you have seen this, there is the awareness or cognition of the reality of things as it is, and you develop it further, and therefore there is the practice, and then when you develop it further, it serves as the factor for overcoming all the negative emotions from within our mind, the defilements from within our mind, and therefore it is the factor for emergence, the definite emergence. And therefore, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths and its characteristics like this is very significant. In Jeren Rinpoche's Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, he goes actually through the he goes through the teachings pertaining to beings of small scope, which was done and written in accordance with the text that preceded Jetsongkhapa, such as the Tenrim, the stages of the doctrine, and the path to the lamp for the enlightenment, path to enlightenment, and so forth. Whereas in the teaching on pertaining to the beings of intermediate scope, he says that the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, it's fundamental, very important teaching of the Buddha. And so this is teaching which is shared between the Sanskrit and the Pali tradition. And then we have the 37 practices or paths, harmonies of enlightenment, with regard to in connection with the mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of feeling and so forth. We enter into the teaching of the suffering and its origin, and then the cessation and the path. And then we have those of the four miracle feats of miracle, which are based on faith, effort, or joyous effort, and wisdom and concentration, single-pointed concentration. So by training in these paths, we have therefore the 7 parts of the Aryas, the enlightenment, 7 factors of enlightenment, and the eightfold path, and so forth. So these are shared in both the Sanskrit and Pali traditions. But the difference is, I meet, of course, monks from Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, and Burma. So during our meetings, I found that in the Pali tradition, they explain the 4 Noble Truths and 16 characteristics on the basis of by resorting to scripture and not using any reasoning and logic as such. Whereas in the Sanskrit tradition, it is done on the basis of reasoning. For example, in the case of Dharmakirti's Pramana Vartika, he says that the suffering and so forth are not this, the psychophysical unenlightened aggregates are not permanent because their causes can be uprooted. They have the opposing factors and can be countered by them. So if you are able to understand the teaching of the Buddha on the basis of understanding that of true cessation through reasoning and logic, then you'll really understand what the Buddha Dharma is about. And when you are able to do that, you'll see that Dharma, the jewel, is something extraordinary. And when you see this, then you will see that on the basis of reasoning, that the Buddha is somebody extraordinary. And therefore, as Buddha Master Nagarjuna says, the best of the teachers, you can actually confirm it from your own knowledge and experience. And therefore, you will be able to see the Sangha jewel as our and therefore you'll see the Buddha as the teacher, someone whom you can trust fully, and this Sangha also as those who assist us from their own experience. So when you have the understanding of the true cessation and the true path, you'll be able to see the quality of the Buddha, that the Buddha has actually gone through the path and become someone enlightened fully, and then also those of the Sangha having the experience of the Dharma jewel within themselves. And then we have the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. The the perfect and wisdom teachings were taught during the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. So we can actually use reasoning to come to the conclusion that the Dharma jewel can be attained, and not just the Dharma jewel in terms of the overcoming the negative emotions, but even the residual stains, the imprints left by them can be overcome, and therefore one can reach Buddhahood. And through precise reasoning and logic. So regarding the teaching of the Perfect and Wisdom Sutras, which teaches that things have no objective independent existence, but those who are not able to take that teaching for them, the Sandinimochana Sutra was taught, and this sutra teaches that the second turning of the wheel of Dharma actually teaches that things have no essential existence because of the characteristics of the three natures. So the first turning of the wheel is to mature our mind, and then the second turning of the wheel of Dharma teaches that of the ontological status of the everything, which is to say that it teaches the clear light in terms of the objects, the emptiness. And then the third turning wheel of the Dharma teaches the clear light as in terms of the subjective mind, which realizes that emptiness. And this is taught mainly in the Tantra, and particularly in the highest yoga Tantra, which uses the innate, basic clear light or luminous mind, within which you have the techniques to make the negative emotions to subside as your experience of the clear light deepens. And then within this experience, you also have the realization of emptiness. So, the third turning of the wheel of Dharma teaches the luminous or clear light mind, and therefore you see that it links you to the tantric teachings. And so in this way, if you could understand the whole structure of the teaching of the Buddha in terms of how you make progress along the path, and by understanding the basic nature of the things and progressing along the path, realizing emptiness, and then using the clear light, the subtle clear light mind, and then into the going into the tantric teachings. So if you need to go to the toilet, please do so.
Questioner.
Then we'll start with question and answer session.
Друзья, сейчас во время сессии вопросов и ответов я обращаю ваше внимание, сзади есть чай. Если вы хотите, вы можете аккуратненько встать, пойти взять чаю, но, пожалуйста, только в боковых проходах перемещайтесь. Пожалуйста, начинайте задавать ваши вопросы.
Yes, question.
Спасибо, Ваше Святейшество, за драгоценное учение, которое вы нам преподали только что. Хотелось бы спросить, существует ли понятие категории времени в учениях традиции Наланды? Рассматривается ли философское понятие времени в philosophy Nalanda?
Your Holiness, the question is about the Nalanda tradition. The Nalanda tradition, does the Nalanda tradition speak about time in philosophical terms? Does it regard time this as a notion, the Nalanda tradition? Nalanda, the tradition of Nalanda. Does it have the notion of time in philosophical terms? Does it study the time as a philosophical notion?
What is precise? Time now.
Regarding time, even the non-Buddhist traditions talk about time being permanent. And then regarding the particles also, they do talk about permanent particle and permanent time as well. And then in the Buddhist text, in the Vibhashika treatises, there is talk about time. And of course, no need to mention that Swatantika and the above also do relate time. But when we have discussions with scientists, it becomes more clear to us the concept of time. When they explain particles on the basis of the quarks and atoms and subatomic particles like quarks and so forth.
Next question.
Пожалуйста, вот с этой стороны вопрос следующий есть?
Yes.
Пожалуйста, следующий.
Здравствуйте, Ваше Святейшество. У меня вопрос по работе. Я ветеринарный врач. И сталкиваемся с ситуацией, когда требуется эвтаназия животных. Приняв обеты Бодхисаттвы, я не исполняю эти действия и отказалась от них. Вот. Вопрос такой. Получается, что я перекладываю свои действия на других врачей, другие люди делают это вместо меня, то есть что мне делать?
Your Holiness, I am a doctor, a veterinarian doctor, and as a veterinarian,
What field?
for
Oh, animal. Oh, yes.
yeah, for animals, and sometimes people ask me to, put the animal to sleep, euthanasia, like when the animal is already very old or very sick. Being myself a Buddhist, I took the vows of Bodhisattva. I cannot perform such treatment, right? So, but on the other hand, I just give this responsibility to someone other. You see, I avoid killing myself, but I make the other doctors kill. What is your advice, please?
Not harming others. Regarding this, it is taught in many different religions. Its main practice in many religions. Of course, not to mention Buddhism. But mainly it depends on your motivation. If you have a loving, compassionate motivation, when you actually go into practice this poor animal, even though it may be a human being who's suffering intensely, excruciatingly, undergoing excruciating pain, full experience, if your motivation is compassion, you need to use your intelligence, this discernment, and see the pros and cons. What is the long-term benefit as opposed to the short-term benefit? You need to check the pros and cons. As it is also mentioned in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, you should act by checking by knowing the purpose.
Next question.
Здравствуйте, я хотела задать такой вопрос.
В микрофон, пожалуйста, вас не очень хорошо слышно.
Здравствуйте, я хотела задать такой вопрос. Вы сегодня говорили, что неведение находится рождение находится под властью неведения, можно так сказать. Вот вы можете объяснить, что это значит более подробно?
Birth is due to ignorance. What does that mean?
Вы могли бы еще раз сказать, пожалуйста?
Вы сегодня говорили...
Плохо слышно, громче, пожалуйста, вас очень плохо слышно.
Вы сегодня говорили, что рождение находится под властью неведения. Вы можете более подробно объяснить этот аспект?
You said that the birth is influenced or is caused by the ignorance. Could you please explain it a little bit more?
So what is meant by the birth is due to ignorance. So merely talking about birth, it's not necessarily the case that it should be because of ignorance, because there are beings who take birth, rebirth out of compassion. So here we are not just talking about rebirth, but a rebirth where you have the psychophysical aggregates which are in the nature of suffering. So the bodhisattvas and Buddhas can can reincarnate, but because of the not ignorance but compassion. So although these two births out of they may look the same, but they are different. So here we are talking about this having a rebirth where you have a psychophysical aggregates which is in the nature of suffering. That is because of ignorance.
Пожалуйста, задавайте вопрос.
Ваше Святейшество, в гарвардских лекциях упоминается о 48 практиках мирных божеств и 58 практиках гневных божеств. Вот если базовая природа человека – это сострадание, почему количество практик гневных божеств превышает количество практик мирных? Спасибо.
The question is about the practices of peaceful deities and wrathful deities. There are 48 practices of peaceful deities, and there are 58 practices of wrathful deities. If the nature of a human being is compassion, why are there more practices of wrathful deities?
So in the tantric texts, we find many different deities and mandala deities. And one of the Tibetan masters has talked about the general structure of Buddhism and then the specifically tailored teachings. So tantric teachings come, the tantric cycle of tantric teachings come under the second category. Whereas the understanding and the development, teachings based on the practices of bodhicitta and also emptiness and so forth come under the category of this general structure. So what you were mentioning has to do with the tantric, within which there are the three external tantras and the three internal tantras, Maha, Anu, and Ati. Maha Yoga of generation stage, and Anu Yoga has to do with completion stage, and then the Ati Yoga, that great completeness. And then there are three other yanas or vehicles, which are the vehicles of the Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattva yanas. Whereas Kriya, Upa, and Yoga are the three external tantras. So in the highest yoga tantra, in three internal tantras, you have to use the clear light mind, the subtle innate clear light mind to realize emptiness. And as long as that the mind becomes manifest, so it remains manifest, the negative emotions cannot arise, and therefore you have a mastery over the this basic nature, the basic fundamental clear luminous state of nature of the mind. And so within that context you have the deity yoga practices in the Mahayana yoga. And because of the different mental dispositions of the different practitioners, you have all these numerous deities that are practiced. And we have the peaceful and the wrathful deities. It doesn't mean that these deities are out there somewhere in some kind of a heavenly realm, but because of the difference in the mental dispositions and the physiological structure of the practitioners, you have these deities appearing to them, these individuals. And therefore, there are these peaceful and wrathful deities that appear to the practitioners according to their own dispositions. And therefore, that is what I will mean by the specifically tailored teachings of Tantras. So a practitioner, because of their mental dispositions and also the structure of their physiology, the nerve systems and the chakras and so forth, and also because of the previous imprints of their from their previous lives, they could have these deities and experiences of the peaceful and wrathful deities. Otherwise, it's not the case that the deities are wrathful and they are always like in angry mood. That's not possible, if in fact. But because of the structure of our nerve systems, the channels, chakras, and so forth, we have these deities appearing to the individual practitioners. And so this cannot be generalized and taken to be a practice that is is common to all practitioners as such. It pertains to the specific, the individuals to whom these deities appear. I have a story to tell. Many years ago, one Japanese went to Tibet. He was as a tourist. And after being in Tibet, he came to see me and he told me, Buddha teaches, or Buddha has taught compassion as basic practice, whereas in Tibet, when he visited the temples, he saw many wrathful, fierce-looking deities, and that night he said he lost his sleep. So why do we have this kind of a deity who look as a blood drinkers and so forth? And so I told him, without going into detail, we need to understand the basic, the structure of the teaching of the Buddha.
Your Holiness, this is the question from Buryatia. The young man, he is 16 years old, and he asks, why do we do prostrations? What is the goal of doing prostrations?
Oh.
So in Guhyasamaja Tantra, there is mention of the definitive explanation of the definitive meaning of the Vajra folded hands and touching them on your crown or forehead and throat and the heart. It has the symbolism of actually withdrawing the wind energy into the central channel, what are known as the 5 basic primary wind energies and 5 secondary wind energies into the central channel. And then, with regard to the term chak, the Tibetan chak for prostration, what you actually mean by that is to pay your respect with a due understanding and aspiration to reach the same kind of attainment that the Buddhas and so forth have reached. And therefore, this is similar. One should have the good motivation when you make prostrations. and even going around the temple and so forth. You should have a good motivation, positive motivation. And then with regard to prostration, you have the prostration with your body, speech and mind. In my case, because I have a bad knee, I cannot do the physical prostration, but I can use my voice and my mind. But of these three prostrations of body, speech and mind, the mental prostration is the most important thing. And so without the good motivation, even if you may do lots of prostrations physically, it may not mean much.
Человек рождается, у него есть любовь и сострадание. Но когда мы живем, у нас в мире очень много боли и страданий. Мы это видим. У меня такой вопрос. А может ли человек быть счастливым? Счастливым каждый день, счастливым всегда? Спасибо.
Your Holiness, the person comes to this world with love and compassion, but we see that in our world we see much pain and suffering. The question is, can one be happy every day in this situation? Can someone be happy every day in this world?
Yes, it's possible, of course. Through the training of mind, as I said earlier, many of us think that happiness is some kind of we take happiness to be some sensorial gratification. For example, having a good sight, or looking at some show, or listening to some interesting music, or using some mobile and looking at some pictures and so forth. So otherwise, when these are gone, when these are not there, people think that they cannot have happiness. So that shows they are more oriented towards finding happiness externally, from external objects. So the experiences of the joyful experiences that you actually have based on the sensorial stimuli, I mean external stimuli of the sensory perceptions, is very temporary. Of course, you can have happiness and joy. Apart from these, you can still have happiness through faith, for example, when you have single-pointed faith and belief in God or some deities and Buddhas and so forth, you will still have the satisfaction. So it is similar to not only the theistic religions, but it's also similar to the Buddhist practice of faith that you can develop from within. And therefore you need to actually use one's wisdom or intelligence and faith and train your mind. And when through this combination of wisdom and faith, when you have joy, happiness and satisfaction, I mean that will be a stable kind of satisfaction which will not be disturbed, even if there may be bad things going around you in the external world. Around you.
Куда она исчезает во время сна, наркоза, память?
그래. 정도 가래.
So even if someone loses chamo. So when someone faints, that person loses memory, but the subtle mind still remains. So within the memory also there are gross and subtle memories. there are different degrees of subtlety within it. For example, when you make a differentiation, when you differentiate between the Sem and Rigpa in the Dzogchen tradition, and when you remain with the Rigpa, the pristine awareness, there is a memory called Lenjikgyeba, which means spontaneously arisen memory. Whereas when your mind becomes subtler and subtler from the grosser states, although the memory may not be the same, even at the subtle state of mind, during the subtle states of mind, there is this impact of the memory. But you can still train your mind so that you can have memory, even at that subtle state of mind, memory of the past experiences. So within memory there could be...
I have a question. What is the cause of laziness and how to get rid of laziness?
What?
Of laziness. What is the cause of it and how to get rid of it? Что причина лени и как устранить лень?
So regarding this laziness, there is this feeling tired due to fatigue, and also a laziness where you are actually lost in, or where you focus your mind on bad things. So in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, there is the mention of when you feel physically fatigued and tired, exhausted, and are not able to continue your practice until you have, as long as this kind of, you are dependent on the gross body, unless you have some experience of being able to master the energies within your mind. So once you are able to gain mastery over the subtle wind energy and the subtle mind, you may not be disturbed by the laziness. But until then, you need to really put effort. And then while in the process of putting effort in the practice, you may feel tired. And then the Bodhisattva Charyavatara says that you need to take a rest. So for some time you should leave the practice aside and take a rest. But sometimes what can happen to us is that when you really have a focus, an objective, a goal that you can actually achieve. If you look at the athletics, for example, they really work hard, almost like, untiringly to achieve their goal. And then your mental state and the courage and determination, like making this prayer, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, and so forth, until that kind of, when you will be pushed to work for others. You may not feel tired. And it depends on, therefore, and in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it also says that which intelligent person would feel discouraged to overcome, to ride the horse of bodhicitta, which leads you from out of despair
I'm from Buryatia.
Leads you from bliss to bliss.
Where we sell
So it's
Dharma books.
very much dependent on
set
our
the prices of
outlook.
publishing house and add transport costs, and that's it. And people are very grateful. They come for Dharma books to our place because we want to make them easy access for Dharma. And also we don't want to accumulate bad karma from selling Dharma and using it for our personal needs like food and etc. So my question, this makes disappointed other people who have such shops, and also some of my employees don't understand it. They don't understand why we sell Dharma without taxes. And according, as far as I understand, that Buddhist teachings should be spread as for free, as wide as possible. So could you please recommend?
What is the question? What is the main point?
Should we continue having no additional price, or should we put a price and maintain market prices?
No.
Excuse me. So selling Dharma, I mean, like by selling books on Dharma, if you make profit, you may be doing business of Dharma business, and that is considered really negative and gravely. But with the motivation that we need for people, I mean, standard books on the Dharma, and of course, depending on your, given your own financial situation, economic situation, if you just give gifts, free gifts, but if you cannot give gifts, I mean, you just make some, money that is just the price, the cost price. I mean, it's okay. And if people say that you are doing Dharma business, I mean, it's their mistake. And people will have all kinds of criticisms. It is human nature, basically, that if something is, if something is seen right by them, and then they kind of praise others. If something is seen as being wrong, and then they criticize others from their own point of view. So we should use the yardstick of the teachings that have come down to us in the Nalanda tradition. What other people say or not doesn't really matter.
У меня такой вопрос. Почти у нас всех есть электронные книги Дхармы и изображения божеств в телефонах. И когда мы эти телефоны ставим на пол или носим в брюках, то не накапливаем ли мы негативную карму неуважения к Дхарме?
So on computers, people download Dharma books. The computers and these tablets and so forth are left and everywhere. People. Of course, if people intentionally sit on their phones and tablets and computers, I mean, that may be disrespectful to the Dharma that is contained in them. But if people just leave it somewhere, how do we have to think about emptiness in our daily life when we do practice? How do we understand, I mean, apply the teaching of impermanence and emptiness and so forth in our daily life, day-to-day life practice? Emptiness. So during our post-meditation sessions, we need to be able to see everything as like illusion. But in order to have that kind of experience, we need to be able to actually reject the independent objective existence in things. and experiences. And therefore, first we need to go through the practice of meditation, sitting in meditation, where you focus on this space-like emptiness, where you should be able to destroy any and every objective existence in things. And then when you are able to do that in meditation, in single-pointed meditation, when you come out of the meditation, you will be able to see everything like illusion. And then practice accordingly. You can also see the cultivation of the cultivation of compassion, love and compassion. So here, this kind of love and compassion is not like mundane love, or which has a tinge of attachment with it, whereas genuine love that we are talking about here and compassion can actually encompass all sentient beings. Whereas our love towards near and dear ones is more biased because of attachment. It's tinged with attachment. And this has its root cause, that of the clinging to some objective independent existence in things, grasping at true existence. Whereas love and compassion that we are talking about here for all sentient beings does not have that root of the ignorance. So on the one hand, with the understanding of emptiness, we need to reduce this clinging to true independent existence things, and on the other hand, we could actually to develop love and compassion because of the fact that the cause of suffering which we create, karma and so forth, have their counter forces which can end them, and which is, the fundamental, the root cause is that of the ignorance. And so, when you see that there's a possibility of liberation by ending the ignorance, although there is this possibility, yet sentient beings cause themselves suffering because of ignorance, then you feel compassion. Of course, I have some experience of it, of this. The love, compassion and bodhicitta. I am thinking that, I think that if I have some more time to develop single-pointed concentration, within this life, I may be able to reach the path of preparation, the bodhisattva path of preparation. Of course, bodhicitta is very powerful to counter or to reduce negative emotions, but the fundamental cause to end our ignorance is that of the realization of emptiness. And so if you want to if you are serious about wishing to implement these teachings in your day-to-day life, you must study Buddha Madhyamaka texts such as the Master Tsongkhapa's Ocean of Reasoning, the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and also the Buddha Palita commentary, as well as commentaries and texts written by Bhava Viveka and Chandra Kirti. And then there are many texts written by the past Tibetan masters. And with regard to Je Rinpoche Tsongkhapa's teaching, you can study Tangye Lekshe Nyingpo, which is the distinguishing the interpretable and the definitive meaning of the sutras. And then the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara, and then also the insight sections of Lamrim Chemo and the great treatise of the stages of the path, and the smaller Lamrim by Tsongkhapa. And the distinguishing or differentiating the provisional and the definitive meaning of the sutras actually goes through 4 points. If you're in rejection of the independent existence in things, So there are these 4 points of which are given in this, and then you will be able to make some see the effect of these.
Ваше святейшество, скажите, пожалуйста, при изучении текстов или заучивании текстов происходит отупление ума, так? Скажите, пожалуйста, что вы посоветуете, чтобы это состояние быстрее проходило?
Sometimes when you read texts or memorize texts, your mind becomes dull. What would you recommend to overcome this dullness?
Oh.
So with regard to intelligence, there is the great intelligence, and then clear intelligence, then profound, and also the and swift. And then there are intelligence which also has the ability to make us better in understanding things, and also in argumenting with others and so forth. So when you are able to give more exercise to the to our mind, to your mind, which means that it's important to use analytical meditation. That really helps you stay alert. Whereas if you just relax your mind, sometimes it becomes more dull. And so in the study of collected topics, through the study of collected topics and so forth, in the monastic institutions where they have learning of philosophy, and the monks are able to maintain their clarity and the alertness of mind. And so the analytical meditation actually helps to stay alert and be clear. And then on top of that, if you could also do recitation of Om Arapatana, the mantra of Manjushri, it could also help to stay alert and clear. It's important to study the texts. When I meet people of my age or older, many of them seem to be quite dull, whereas the geishis, although maybe physically quite weak and laxed, but then their minds stays alert and active. And so because of this is because of years of experience. It's years of training.
Манад 1979 онд очсон түүнээс хойш би тантай яг өөрөө биеэр уулзаж тантай хамт зураг авах болгож хүсэн мөрөдсөр байгаад өнөөдөр миний хүсэл мөрөдөл биелж байна. Та надтай зураг хамт авах болж өгнө. Таны утуудаа насад энэ тунх сайхан байхад хүсэн ёрё. Та сая манай Монголд очиод ирээд явсан. Танд их баярлсан.
소개 보여줘.
So she's asking basically for a photo session with His Holiness, that she has met His Holiness and seen His Holiness in 1979, the first time His Holiness came to Mongolia, and then in 1991 she also had an opportunity to take a picture with His Holiness, and she's now asking. So I'll just begin the 9th chapter of Bodhisattva Charya Avatara. Just start.
Now question next tomorrow. Now today I would like to stop here.
The sage is taught all these branches of teachings for the sake of wisdom. Therefore, those who wish to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. The first verse. So this guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, beginning with the benefit of the awakening mind, down to the 8th chapter, the chapter on meditation, taught teaches the skillful means or method. So all these methods are for the purpose of developing wisdom, for the sake of wisdom. So we usually say that the Buddha taught 84,000 different teachings to overcome 84 different types of disturbing emotions, but mainly it is this wisdom realizing emptiness which counters our negative emotions completely, whereas other negative emotions may be able to be subsided by some form of practice like love, countering anger and so forth, but this is actually just a temporary means, but the ignorance, which is the root of all disturbing emotions, can be countered only by developing wisdom which sees the reality of things as it is. And the Buddha's powers, the what are known as the 10 powers of the Buddhas, are also explained on the basis of the wisdom of the Buddha. And then regarding the perfection of wisdom, we have the name itself based on the wisdom and not the other perfections like generosity, morality and so forth. Because the subject matter of the sutras, these perfection of wisdom sutras, is emptiness. And on the basis of this subject matter, you have the text itself is named after it. And so the main means of overcoming our ignorance, and also the stains left by these negative emotions, the ignorance, is wisdom. Of course, wisdom is also coupled with bodhicitta. So in order to overcome the even the stains or the imprints of the negative emotions, in the Tantra, there is the subtle clear light mind that is used that becomes manifest with the wisdom as the wisdom of emptiness. That when that is realized, then you can actually overcome even the stains or the imprints of negative emotions because of the dissolution of the whitish increase and whitish appearance, reddish increase, and the near attainment of blackish near attainment and so forth. And so what kind of wisdom are we talking about here? Here, the wisdom mainly refers to that of the wisdom realizing the actual nature of things, which means that there are two different aspects. There is the appearance level of conventions, which is the conventional truth, where we do not do any analysis, but we are just satisfied with how things are in the world, according to the worldly renown. Whereas when you do deeper analysis into how things exist, and then you find that final reality, and that ultimate reality is that is the ultimate reality, and therefore it says conventional and ultimate, these are accepted as being the two truths. So regarding the two truths, the term two truths is even found in the non-Buddhist text traditions. So of course, although Christians don't use these terms, two truths as such, but I believe that we could actually apply this notion of the two truths to Christianity. One Christian nun asked me, when we have an egoistic feeling and anger, how do we actually go about with, what should we think? And I told her that in Buddhism we talk about meditating on emptiness, whereas in Christianity you believe in a creator God, and therefore when you become egoistic and also jealous and angry, you should think that you are created by this creator, the God, and of this whole universe that the creator God has created, you are a tiny part of it. You should think like that, and that may help you to overcome your anger, to your ego and anger and so forth. And so from this you can think about the nature of the final nature of this God as the ultimate truth. And whereas in India, from the Sankhyas down, and then within the Sankhyas say that there are the 25 objects or elements, and then the primal factor. So everything is created by the primal factor. So they talk about the two truths in that way, and then the Vaibhashikas also talk about the two truths, where something can be dissected into parts so that it loses its identity, those things, or something can be broken into pieces when and that it loses its identity. Those are conventional truth, whereas things that do not even lose their identity even after dissecting into parts and so forth, I mean, those are the ultimate. And so so whether it's the Buddha or others, when it comes to looking at the ultimate reality of things, even the Buddha is merely designated, the sentient beings in samsara are merely designated, and then the path leading from samsara to the nirvana and enlightenment, Buddhahood, is also merely in name. Whereas if you really try to search for the identity of things, whether in samsara or samsaric beings or Buddhas and so forth, I mean, they cannot be found at all. Even quantum physicists talk about the lack of objective existence in things. Although they are more focused on the matter, the physical or the matter and so forth, and with regard to the subjective, the subject, the person or the mind, I mean, they have not yet done much analysis. And so, what the scientists are saying, when they say that things have no objective existence, is very similar to what the Chittamatras say as well, by using the term, by using the reasoning that the subject and the object, the object and the subjective mind, or the perception that sees it, have no duality, and because they are simultaneously arisen, and therefore there's no external existence. And then within the Madhyamakas, Savatantrika Madhyamakas, I mean, they do not need to talk about there not being external objects, but the mind having some kind of a true existence as such. Just as there is no true existence in the external phenomena, likewise, mind also has no true independent existence. And so these two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, can be also said to be of one essence or nature, one essence. And Master Nagarjuna says that what arises through dependence has no is said to be empty, and it is designated, and that it is the middle way. And whatever is dependent is said to be there's nothing which is not dependent, therefore there's nothing which is empty. And so, according to the Madhyamaka school, which rejects any objective existence in things and self and events, for them everything is merely designated. And so everything can be explained in terms of being merely designated. There's nothing whatever that exists objectively. And so designation by dependence, dependence by designation can actually do away with both the extremes of nihilism and eternalism. So because dependence means that there's no independent existence in things, and merely designated, and that means that the things are not nihilism, and then that designated means that it has no independent essential existence. And so the things are actually accepted on the level of this appearance without doing any analysis into the nature of things. So the ultimate is not object of mind. The mind is spoken of as conventional. The world is seen to be of two types, yogis and common people. So yogis here refer to those who do critical analysis into the things. And scientists could also be considered as yogis, and quantum physics also can be included within this term. So yogis, yoga means to join perfectly. So these are the people who actually look into the things, the nature of things as it is. And so here the yogi is not someone who is considered as some kind of a realized being, but someone who yokes his mind, his or her mind, with the truth. So these philosophical systems actually check into, examine the nature of things. And they also see that this body decays, and those who accept future lives say that this body does not go into the next life, but the mind goes from this. The mind also does not go, but some entity goes from this life to the next, and therefore they say that there is an Atma or a soul, which is not the body, not the mind, but an entity which goes from this life to the next. And this is, this kind of explanation is given by doing investigation, doing scrutiny into the nature of the self. And then those who do not do such critical analysis into the nature of things are called common people, common beings. The world of common people are undermined by the world of yogis. Through difference in their intelligence, yogis too are undermined by the higher ones. Our thesis is proved by examples accepted by both. According to the in ancient Indian cosmology, there are for example, according to the Kala Chakra, There are 6 continents. They are called the Dagden, and then the Shambhala, then Li Yul, and then Tibet, China, and India. So there's no mention of America at all in this. So these are actually according to what was known at the time to the common people. When, Daksang Lotsawa makes this distinction amongst the beings, where he says without those not doing any kind of analysis or scrutiny, and those doing slight analysis, and those doing intense analysis into the things. So with regard to the size of the moon and the sun, there's a huge difference. But Abhidhamma Kosha Karika mentions that there is difference of only 1 yojana or something. And then, so these are what given according to what was actually known in those days in India, and it's not in accordance with what the scientists would say. And so, through the difference in their intelligence, yogis too are undermined by the higher ones. So within the yogis, or those who do critical analysis into the things, with regard to this quantum physicists, of course, they do analyze the external objects, and they say there's nothing objectively existing, whereas they have not yet done any analysis into the subject, the subjective mind and the subject element. Whereas in the case of the Indian philosophical systems, there is analysis into, or the examination of the self and the perceiver and so forth. And then there are those who say that there is a permanent self, and this is undermined by the reasoning that things change moment by moment. And so we have the Vaibhashikas rejecting what the non-Buddhists assert with regard to self, Atman, and then those of the Sautrantikas actually refuting the position of the Vaibhashikas, and then Vaibhashikas being refuted by the Chittamatras in terms of their assertion with regard to their assertion of the external objects, whereas as Chittamatras say there's no external object, and then the Madhyamakas in turn undermine their position and so forth. And so, by examples accepted by both, they actually do kind of argue on something that they actually can talk about. There's a common ground that they analyze. Whereas unanalyzed, nothing can be found. For example, the basis, nature of the basis, the path, and the resultant state of Buddhahood. So if you say that nothing can be found, then the Buddhahood cannot be attained. And so it says, unanalyzed, the practitioners train for the result. So with regard to the basis, the path and the progression along the path and the resultant state of Buddhahood, we do not do any analysis into the nature of them as such, but without doing any analysis, you actually can talk about them for the result. So why do these common people, common beings and the yogis argue with each other? Is the world sees things as conceive them to be truly existent. So of course this is what appears to us, how things appear to us. Savatantrika Madhyamakas who say that things have no true existence, but they still assert how things are on the basis of how they appear to us. And accordingly, whereas in the case of those Madhyamakas which say that there is no objective existence, say that nothing can be found when you do analysis. So now the world here refers to those of the Madhyamakas who assert objective existence in things and the philosophical systems down below them. So the world sees things and conceives them to be truly existent. So with regard to causality, that dependence in terms of how cause and effect and work, as Buddhists, all philosophical schools do assert cause and effect, and they actually perceive them to be truly existent, which means that there is an objectively existing cause which gives rise to an objectively existing result or effect. Not like an illusion. In this regard, there is dispute between the yogis and the world. So both the yogis and the common beings, common people can feel hungry. Therefore, we need to take meal. So you have come with great interest, and I usually have some, prepare somebody doing a revision. So Yangding Rinpoche can do the revision, give you the gist of what I have said, and then you can have questions and pose questions to Yangding Rinpoche at 1:30. From 1:30 to 1:30 to 2:30 or 3. If you are not in a hurry, you may still continue until the 3 o'clock. So you have come all the way from Russia, and you need to learn something. Take something back that you learn from here, not just saying that, oh, I've had an audience of the Lama and be satisfied with that. So the Buddha came to this world, but it was not by seeing the Buddha that people reached enlightenment or liberation. And the Buddha himself has said, I have shown you the path to liberation, but the liberation is, depends, it's in your hands. Whether you, by putting the Buddha's hands on our head, he will not lead us to liberation. And so it's not enough just to see me. So right here, I'm here to introduce you to the teaching of the Buddha, his intention. And so I have some tasted the teaching of the Buddha myself. And so likewise, just as Rinpoche says, whatever I have realized, I will share with others out of compassion, moved by compassion. And so I do my practice of the Deity Yoga practice for about 5 hours every morning. So I do Deity Yogas where I visualize myself as gigantic, majestic deities. But that doesn't really help us much in making transformation within. But what really helps us is this dual principle of bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness. And so this is what has happened to me, not the deity yogas. So these serve as the foundation, and then on the basis of that foundation, I add the Reti Yoga practices. So when you develop some stability and in your focusing meditation, single-pointed meditation, then you go into the practice of using the internal energy, the inner energy, and also the bindus, the vital drops, and so forth. And then you go into the higher practices of Sangtel and breaking through the solidity. I mean, it's very difficult to have these experiences right away. The real experience of transformation comes through understanding of emptiness and bodhicitta. So, I'm talking from my own experience. And then the verses of dedication. Ngô con là chúng ta, chuyện chuyện rồi, ngô là gì?